can consider an area in your neighborhood where you have a single story of commercial, retail, like the laundromat, grocery, coffee store here, and nothing above it, that is an area very likely where residential is allowed and where the city has overlaid a commercial district on top of it. It's called a commercial overlay in zoning, where commercial is allowed in a residential area. We look at that and we say, well, that is an ideal place for us to enable 2 to 4 stories of housing above a commercial ground floor, mirroring what already exists there in many situations, but had been made impossible to achieve as a result of our modern zoning resolution. So a lot of buildings like what you see there on the right-hand side of that image, they're there, but they were built before 1961.
Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you all for joining us. My name is JD Michaels, Executive Director of Mayor's Office of Ethnic and Community Media and Citywide Marketing. I'm pleased to introduce DCP Director Dan Grodnick, who will discuss specific details of the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity proposal. He'll be discussing how this plan directly addresses issues impacting your community. So before passing it over to Director Grodnick, I want to remind everyone that there will be time for Q&A at the end of this presentation, and we will be recording this presentation and sending out a copy for you. Please do mute, and when it's time for question and answers, we'll just push the raised hand button and go through anything you'd like. So without any further delay, Dan, thank you so much for being here today. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you all. I appreciate your interest in the subject and look forward to running through some of this with you. As you heard, my name is Dan Grodnick. I'm the Director of the Department of City Planning and Chair of the City Planning Commission. I'm going to give you a short presentation about City of Yes for housing opportunity. But before I do that, I just wanted to say a couple of words about what this would mean for the city. You don't need me to tell you that New York City has a severe housing crisis. Just to put a number on it, we have a vacancy rate of 1.41%, which is the lowest it has been since the 1960s. This hurts everyone. Families that want to grow but are in overcrowded apartments, seniors that want to stay in their communities, lower income New Yorkers who are struggling to pay rent. This housing crisis has been going on for so long that, you know, some take it as a fact of life, that New York City is a place where rents always go up, where housing is always hard to find. But we don't need to live this way. We can create a city that people can afford, where there are options for housing in every neighborhood. So you can rent or buy, stay in your own community or move closer to your family or your job. And there is a simple premise to accomplish that goal: build a little more housing in every neighborhood. And that's what we're proposing to do here with City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. As we're going to get into in a sec, this is a citywide plan that is designed to work differently in different parts of the city. It can seem complicated, but the basic approach is incremental growth over a wide geography. That will look different in different places, but we are not proposing to put the Empire State Building in Whitestone, Queens, for example. The sorts of changes that we're proposing are very much within the character of our neighborhoods of New York City, and also able, in the aggregate, to deliver a fair amount of housing to deal with this crisis. But anytime you're proposing zoning changes, people feel very strongly about it. And unfortunately, there have been some instances where we've seen incorrect information shared about what the proposal would do. So I appreciate your time and attention today, and the work that you do to share correct information about what we are actually proposing. So with that, let's get into it. I think you can see my screen already, right? Yes, yes. Okay, good. Terrific. Okay. So first of all, City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is the third of 3 citywide text amendments that we have advanced as part of this administration. The first one was for carbon neutrality, which helped us to create a more sustainable city by expanding opportunities for decarbonization projects. We saw a lot of situations where zoning was impeding our other policy goals of sustainability. City of Yes for Economic Opportunity was a proposal which tried to take aim at zoning rules which had become laughably outdated and which were stopping innovation, entrepreneurship, and growth, and prolonging vacancies in our shops and storefronts. Both of these first 2 proposals were approved by the City Council. And we were very grateful to our partners in the City Council for engaging on these difficult subjects, making responsible amendments, and then passing them both. The third one of 3 is the one that we're talking about today, and that's City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, which right now is right in the middle of public review. The next step on this one is for a vote at the City Planning Commission, and then it will be off to the City Council for its consideration. As I noted at the beginning, this is a citywide text amendment that would make it possible to build a little more housing in every neighborhood. And by doing it that way, it means we can have a big impact on our housing shortage without dramatic change in any one neighborhood. Why is this important? Why do we need more housing in New York City? Well, we're in a crisis, 1.41% vacancy rate, lowest since 1968. 50% of our renters are rent burdened, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their income on rent. And of course, we have a significant population of homeless New Yorkers. Measured at the end of last year, there were nearly 93,000 homeless people, and within them, 33,000 of them were kids who slept in the shelter system when measured in December 2023. This is a problem which has not crept up on us in the last year or 2 or 5 years or even 10 years. This is many decades in the making. We're creating less housing than we used to. We have restrictive zoning rules that are limiting the number and types of homes that can be built. We also have found that new housing is concentrated in just a few neighborhoods. In 2023, we have 59 community boards. In 2023, 10 of those community districts added as much housing as the other 49 combined. So that's a real imbalance, and one which is putting additional pressure on just a few parts of the city to produce almost all of the new housing. This housing scarcity problem is also hurting the local economy. When people spend more of their money on rent, they have less to spend on everything else. That harms our local economy, slows job growth. It also, of course, lack of opportunity for the creation of housing means fewer jobs in construction and residential maintenance. We have estimated that this proposal that I'm about to describe to you in detail would add an estimated $58.2 billion to New York City's economy and create more than 260,000 jobs in the construction and service sectors alone. Now, zoning, it's one tool. It's an important tool, but it's one tool. Zoning, as you all know, regulates the density and use of what's permitted to be built. It can include requirements for income-restricted affordable housing. This is entirely within the city's control to change zoning. But zoning doesn't actually build it. Zoning doesn't fund it. Zoning is an enabling statute. It is a way to create an opportunity where you hope that people will take advantage of the opportunity that is being presented. There, of course, are other tools for the creation of housing. They include subsidies and tax incentives for creating and preserving affordable housing, support for homeownership models, tenant protections, but zoning is one tool, and it's an important one. Okay, how can we help deal with our crisis with zoning? Well, we aim here to update our zoning rules to create more housing and more types of housing across all New York City neighborhoods. This will mean a lot of housing overall, but without dramatic change or overtaxed infrastructure. It can reduce our housing costs, give New Yorkers more options of housing, more housing types, more affordable housing in high demand areas, and also support job growth and the New York City economy. Okay, this is the overview of the proposal. I'm just going to pause just for 1 second so you can look at this map to orient yourself as to what we mean when we refer to low density areas and medium and high density areas in zoning. Low density is the areas which you might think of as a 1 or 2 family home or a modest apartment building of, let's say, 5 stories, 6 stories. Those are your low density neighborhoods. Medium and high density areas, you might think of Long Island City, downtown Brooklyn, all of Manhattan, as you see here on the map, South Bronx. And we have proposals here that apply to our low density areas in zoning R1 to R5 and our medium and high density areas. And we're going to talk about those in a sec. We also have proposals that relate to parking and also other citywide actions that assist with office conversions and infill on campuses and things like that. Okay, let's talk about them. Starting with the low density proposals. First, and now we're looking at the area in blue that was on that first map over there. Now, unfortunately, due to restrictive zoning, most low density areas in New York City have stopped building new homes, which has contributed to our housing shortage. We want to allow for the creation of a little bit more housing in low density areas in ways that support homeowners, it's good for homeowners, provide space for larger multi-generational families, and also, critically, don't impact neighborhood look and feel. So how do we do that? Well, the first way we do that is we've introduced a concept here called town center zoning. Town center zoning, if you can see this image on the bottom left of this slide here, you can consider an area in your neighborhood where you have a single story of commercial, retail, like the laundromat, grocery, coffee store here, and nothing above it. That is an area very likely where residential is allowed and where the city has overlaid a commercial district on top of it. It's called a commercial overlay in zoning, where commercial is allowed in a residential area. We look at that and we say, well, that is an ideal place for us to enable 2 to 4 stories of housing above a commercial ground floor, mirroring what already exists there in many situations, but had been made impossible to achieve as a result of our modern zoning resolution. So a lot of buildings like what you see there on the right-hand side of that image, they're there, but they were built before 1961. So all of our rules that have been layered on over time made it impossible to replicate that building on the right. We think that 2 to 4 stories of residential on top of commercial is not only appropriate, it's very helpful. If you look at this map over here on the right-hand side, you can see where we have commercial overlays in low density districts where this would apply. So commercial corridors in low density areas. Next, transit-oriented development. It's a subject that gets a lot of attention as a concept. It's a good planning principle to put housing as close as possible to your transit centers or to train stations. What it means for the purpose of this proposal is to allow for modestly sized apartment buildings. Again, 3 to 5 stories here, that's the max. 5 would be the max, within the greater transit zone. So if you're within a half mile of a subway or a rail station, you have a lot that is over 5,000 square feet, and you are on the short end of a block or facing a wide street, 75 feet or more, then you're eligible. If you don't have those things, you're not eligible. So you're within a half mile of train, 5,000 square foot site, and you're on a wide street or a short end of a block, that site would be eligible for transit-oriented development, which again would allow for a modest apartment building right there. Accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units are a modest space on a homeowner's own property, which is something that has been done in many parts of the country already. So this would not be novel to New York City, but this is the idea that we want to help homeowners by allowing 1 or 2 family homes to add an accessory unit like a backyard cottage, a garage conversion, or basement apartment on their own site. It helps them to pay for household expenses. It provides space for multi-generational families. And of course, it is a way for us to, in low density areas, create a little bit of housing, which is an important principle. But it's been great for multi-generational families and homeowners around the country. We want to give New York City homeowners that same opportunity. As an alternative, we also want to give homeowners the opportunity to enlarge an existing home to meet their family's needs. This is the way that we might do this. We have outdated zonings, what we call our district fixes part of the proposal. We have a lot of buildings that are out of compliance with existing zoning. It has created challenges for them. They don't have the opportunity to adapt homes to meet their own family's needs. This would allow us to essentially give a 2-family home the ability to exist in a 2-family district, or a multi-family building to exist in a multi-family district, where today we have so many rules that have made it functionally impossible for those things to exist. In fact, everything gets crammed down. So you end up seeing 1-family homes in 2-family districts, and you see 2-family homes in multi-family districts, because we have so many rules that make it impossible to do what zoning otherwise intends to be allowed. Those are the sorts of things which help us marginally here and there throughout the city, but in the aggregate have a real impact. Okay, now let's talk about medium and high density areas, the places that were in the orange or amber or yellow on that first map. Oh, here we go. So in these areas of the city, we propose a universal affordability preference. What is that? What is UAP? Well, we propose allowing buildings to add an additional 20% more housing if those additional homes are permanently affordable. Okay, so it's really it. So if somebody wants to participate, this is a voluntary thing. If somebody wants to participate, they could have the opportunity to go about 20% bigger in their development. And to do so, they would need to make the incremental increase permanently affordable. So this would allow incremental housing growth throughout medium and high density areas. It encourages affordable housing throughout the city rather than just concentrating it in a few neighborhoods. It has an affordability requirement of 60% of the area median income. And also you can average it out. So it has to average to 60. So it can be a little lower, it can be a little higher. Here's an example of what this means. This is a medium density district, an R6 in zoning. But here you have an example of a faith-based organization that wants to partner with the developer to rebuild a house of worship and do some housing up above. This site today is limited to a 3 FAR. FAR is floor area ratio. So the higher the FAR number, the more development you're allowed to do. This site is limited to a 3 FAR, which gets you about 35 units of housing, which is fine. That's what you get in an R6 today. But if we were able to make this change, it would get you 3.9 FAR for this site. Would get you around 10 to 12 more units, as long as everything between 3 and 3.9 is permanently affordable. So those 10 to 12 additional units, permanently affordable housing, which we otherwise would not get on this site. By the way, the reference here to AIRS, where it says 3.9 FAR like AIRS, that's a program that exists today where we do essentially the same thing that I'm describing, a bonus for senior affordable housing. If you provide that senior affordable housing in certain geographies where it is eligible, then you can get a 20% bonus for that development for those units specifically. This just gives you a flavor of what it looks like without it and with it, left to right. If this initiative had been in place since 2014, we would have had an additional 20,000 income restricted affordable homes in New York City, enough to house about 50,000 New Yorkers. Okay, on to some citywide initiatives. First here is ending parking mandates. What does this mean? So New York City zoning resolution defines very strictly the mandatory minimum number of parking spaces that must exist in every zoning district, in every neighborhood, in every borough of the city. Now, of course, as you might imagine, developers routinely go above the mandatory minimum in areas where they need to. And in other areas, developers come to the City Planning Commission for waivers out of parking in areas where they believe that parking is not necessary because they're right next to a subway or whatever. What we have found is that our mandatory parking minimums have ultimately started to drive up rents. They have come in conflict with our desire to do housing creation. It is an obstacle to housing growth, especially affordable housing. So as a reminder here, parking's still allowed. We are not creating a cap on the amount of parking that can be provided. We're just eliminating the mandate of what must be provided as a minimum. So projects can add what is appropriate at their location. And we understand there's a wide range as to what is needed throughout the city in different developments. Here's just an example of something that comes up today with a mandate. So here you have a developer that wants to build a 16-unit apartment building very close to the subway on this site. You waive out of the parking mandate if you're creating less than 10 units of housing. So there's no parking requirement even today for less than 10 units of housing. But you hit the 11th unit of housing, and in this area, a 50% parking mandate kicks in, which means 6 parking spaces here. So what we see is, and rationally, a developer does not go to that 11th unit because the 11th unit obligates them to 6 parking spots, which they rightly believe is not needed on this location. Without the mandate, they could have gone up to 16 parking spaces. Here, we end up with 10 units of housing and no parking spaces anyway, which is a bad outcome for the city. We want the 16 units right here. Our mandates are actually getting in the way of housing production, and that is what we're trying to deal with. Again, recognizing that, you know, in some neighborhoods, it's pretty essential that you provide parking in those buildings, or else they will not be marketable. In other areas, the mandates are getting directly in the way of creating housing unnecessarily. Okay, some contextual infill on campuses. So we have campuses around the city that have development rights. NYCHA campuses, churches with parking lots, residential co-ops, schools. But we've got some barriers in zoning that get in the way here. So we want to streamline some outdated rules that make it easier for campuses to add new buildings if they want to. This helps to pay for repairs to existing buildings, breathe new life into community institutions, and help us address our citywide housing crisis. And I will note that sometimes our rules today make it even very difficult to create contextual infill developments. So they are out of whack with existing context. These rules would make any infill opportunities much more contextual, much more consistent with existing buildings that are already there. We want to create a clear pathway for developing shared housing. We don't have that today. We want to make it possible to build shared housing in multifamily zoning districts, enable a range of new shared housing projects, including affordable. We want to provide new housing options for students and young adults. And our thought here is, we want to open up the family-sized apartments that today are frequently occupied by groups of singles for families. So we want to make sure that family-sized units are available for families. And that includes certainly creating a lot more family-sized units, but also enabling single-size units or shared housing models. And we think zoning should enable those sorts of things, not forbid them. Here's an interesting example of this. Our zoning today includes a mathematical limitation on the number of small units that you can include in a building. It's called the dwelling unit factor, and it prevents buildings from including smaller units. So this proposal here would eliminate that mathematical equation here in central locations. You can see where we're proposing to eliminate it and allow for buildings with more studio and one-bedroom apartments. Again, this is not to prioritize studios and one-bedrooms over family-sized units. It's actually to try to take some of the pressure off of family-sized units, which we are seeing today are too frequently occupied by groups of singles. This is an important entry point to the New York City housing market, so we just want to enable it. Zoning should not forbid it. Okay, and getting close to the end here, we also want to enable vacant, non-residential buildings. So think office building to convert to housing. We have a 19% vacancy rate in our commercial office buildings in New York City today, and outdated rules prevent many underused non-residential buildings from converting to housing. And today, the geography where you're eligible to convert an office building, for example, is here in the dark purple. So we propose expanding that geography. We're not just going to limit this to Western Queens, Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn. We want to expand the geography. We want to move the eligibility date for conversions from 1961 to 1991 to allow more recent buildings to convert. We want to allow buildings to convert to all types of housing. And we really want to allow for any non-residential building, to the extent that housing is allowed, to convert. We need housing. It's adaptive reuse is a good way for us to get it. And in the context of offices, it also happens to be a win-win at a moment where we have too high of a vacancy rate in our commercial office buildings and too low of a vacancy rate in the context of housing. Okay, conclusion here. How is it going to help? Well, a little more housing in every neighborhood and more housing types for the full range of New Yorkers is what we're after, and that is what we expect we will get. Significantly more affordable housing, reduce the pressure on gentrifying neighborhoods and areas that have gotten hit hardest by the housing shortage and exclusionary zoning. We want to support homeowners and multi-generational families, and we want to create more transit-oriented, sustainable development. We know it's a big proposal and it's a hard one for people to digest. So we have created significant resources to help this process. That includes an illustrated guide to the proposal, which provides detailed information about what we are doing. It's got technical illustrations, one-pagers going through each of the proposals that I just ran through with you. Applicability maps. So if you want to know in your neighborhood which of these proposals might be applicable, pull up those applicability maps and it will answer that question. It applies in each, how it shows how everything applies in each community board around the city. And then we have a frequently asked questions document, which addresses misconceptions and those issues that we most frequently hear. I think Casey just posted some of that in the chat for your ease of access. Now, just to wrap it up here, before I go to your questions, as I noted at the beginning, we are right now in the public review portion of this proposal. We have just gone through the 60-day period for community boards and borough presidents. We had a hearing, public hearing at City Planning Commission. We expect the City Planning Commission will vote on the proposal in the coming weeks. If the proposal passes the City Planning Commission, we expect to send it to the City Council before the end of 2024, or we expect to send it to the Council so that the Council would be voting on it before the end of 2024. Okay, that's the end of my official presentation. But now I'm looking forward to answering your questions. And again, thank you very much for your interest in this topic.
Dan, thank you so much. That is incredible and a lot of wonderful information. We do have some questions starting. The first question we have is from Monica at Radio Rampa.
Hello, thank you for that. The first question I just wanted to ask, could you confirm, you said there is 90% vacancy in the office spaces in the city of New York?
19.
I'm not sure I understood that.
19.
90, exactly. Okay, 19.
Yeah, 19. I'm sorry. Yes, 19.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry then. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yes, that makes
good.
much more. That's much more sense. Yes.
Much makes more sense. Yes. My question is, I have residents, I mean, my audience is, a lot of them is residents of Queens. And like Meadow Village, Ridgewood, Glendale, those areas, they are a little like not sure how is this proposal gonna work in terms of parking spaces, which you addressed in your presentation. I understand what you said, but also maybe you could, just give me a little insight into that. They're afraid that the current, also the sewage system is not ready for that. And they're afraid that it's going to take the rest of the parking space that is left. And it's so difficult for them to park there anyway, and they own their houses, because this is an area where a lot of people just own their houses, not multi-units buildings. So if you could address those concerns, I could pass them to those people. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the question. Most importantly, as it relates to parking, this proposal says if you have parking, keep it. If you want to add more parking in a future development, that's fine. If you don't want to add parking in a future development, that's okay too, because zoning tends to be over prescriptive in some areas. And we know that in the case of parking, it tends to be delivered where it is needed. We see people frequently going well above the mandatory minimum number of parking spaces that we have in zoning today. And That's based on need. So we think that this will be, and this is proven to be the case in other areas that have eliminated their mandates, parking continues to be delivered where it is needed. The broader question.
If I can just, because of parking, they're
course.
more for like, the more people is gonna come, the more parking space will be needed. And it's not the buildings that already have parkings in it. It is just like street parking. That's gonna be affected too. This was more of a concern in this way. That's what I
Yes,
meant.
I understand. So the question about having any number of additional people in a neighborhood and what that might mean for parking or any other level of infrastructure. These are important questions, and one which was studied in depth by our environmental review of this proposal. The most important thing for your listeners to remember and understand here is that by allowing a little bit of housing across a very wide geography, we do not expect significant changes here, neighborhood by neighborhood. That is what has borne out in our study. We are continuing to look at this proposal, hear feedback from communities. Certainly we'll be working with our partners in the city council to address areas where we believe there might be a particular concern as raised by elected officials. But by doing it this way, which is modest incremental change over a wide geography, we do not believe that you will see dramatic changes in neighborhoods. And that, of course, includes the concerns that your listeners were raising.
Okay. Thank you so much. Paul Liotta from Staten Island Advance.
Hi, Chair Garonik. How you doing?
Hi, Paul. How you doing?
Doing well. I appreciate you taking the time on this.
Sure.
So I think my question is pretty Staten Island centric. I understand there have been people locally who are in favor of this plan, but the community boards, borough president, the city council members have all come out against this, and to one degree or another. So, I mean, I guess my question is, and I'm assuming that they are responding to concerns they're hearing from their constituents. You know, the paper's been hearing a lot of those same concerns. But all that being said, my question is, do you think the city could have done more to outreach to communities opposed to this issue, opposed to this plan? Or do you think there were people in certain parts of the city who were just unreachable, for lack of a better word?
I appreciate the question. We worked extremely hard here to take unprecedented steps to reach New Yorkers where they are. And that certainly includes Staten Island. We created for the first time an entire division at the Department of City Planning for community engagement. We went out to over 175 community board meetings. Remember, there are only 59 community boards. 175 community board meetings since the proposal was introduced. We had 10 public information sessions. We released the materials that I showed you at the end of my presentation with the annotated guide and the individual one-pagers and the illustrated guide. We've done frequently asked questions, both through video and through text. We have worked to brief council members, educate them consistently over the last 2 years about what we're talking about here and what we're proposing. And yet, I recognize that there are still people who might say, well, I'm just, either just learning about it or am concerned about it, or and I understand that. I understand that it's in a city of 8.3 million people, we can do our very best, and we count on community boards to help us and borough presidents to help us, and our council members and other elected officials to help us to educate New Yorkers and to explain some of these very complicated topics. So I certainly understand the question. I've reflected on this question because I like to do things right. And the charter sets the path for how you do a big, complicated zoning change, which is meaningful and actually moves the needle. And it's defined as, you send it off to the community boards and borough presidents and the council. That's the official. But we did all of these other additional supports as a way to try to meet people where they are. And of course, we continue to do that even as we are right in the middle of the process. And we will continue to do that right up to the day that the city council casts its vote.
Thank you so much. Gonzalo Duran from the Bronx Daily.
Yes, hello. My question is, the mandates that you're trying to change were put in place for a reason by the previous administration. Given the current goal to alter these mandates, I ask, what do you believe has led us into this housing crisis?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that this has been a decades-long failure to respond to a brewing crisis, where in the last 40 years, we created jobs at half the rate that we did in the prior 40 years. And in the prior 40 years, we actually had lost population. In the last decade, we saw the creation of 800,000 jobs and 200,000 homes. These are all factors which have led us to the moment where we are today. And I think that there is a much greater appreciation of the connection between the lack of housing and the price of rent, the lack of housing and the pressures of gentrification, the lack of housing and displacement, homelessness, the imbalance of power between landlords and tenants in New York City. So I think that we are in a moment now, based on decades worth of not producing enough housing, where inaction is no longer an option, and where we need to take real steps to put ourselves on a better path.
Thank you, sir. Next, Anna Pickerman from Rusa Radio.
Thank you. My question is, will the parkland be affected with this proposal?
No, this does not touch parkland. This is only modest changes to existing zoning districts. And no, it does not touch parkland.
Thank you.
Next, Mohsen Zahir from Urdu News.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Dan, I have 3 quick questions.
Sure.
Number one, what do you anticipate? How much housing will be created if these proposals will be approved by the council? Second is, you talk about expansion in 1 or 2 family units. So if somebody expand their housing unit, would there be increase in the property taxes too? And third is, what about the basements? A lot of people have basements. People can live over there, but they don't rent out just because it's illegal in the city. So thank you so much.
Got it. Thank you for the questions. First question, we anticipate about 100,000 units over 15 years. Number 2, if you add an accessory dwelling unit, and again, remember, this is a choice for you. If you decide that you believe it is beneficial to you to add an accessory dwelling unit, that has the potential to increase the assessed value of your home. And that is a factor that people should consider. Now, of course, we are looking at ways in which the city and state can consider, helping homeowners in a variety of ways to make that easier and to mitigate some of those potential costs. But that's a sort of a parallel conversation to the zoning question. The zoning question says, let's make it possible. Then the question becomes, okay, how do we actually effectuate the things so that it is cost effective for homeowners? It's a great question. And then the third about basement apartments. Now, obviously, there are basement apartments that exist today. There are basement apartments that are not legal in some cases. There's been tragedies associated with basement apartments in areas where there's been significant storm events. There are two things. First, the state of New York has enabled the city of New York to do a pilot program in some areas to legalize existing basement apartments, and that is a conversation which is underway. As it relates to zoning, we can't, through zoning, legalize something which is otherwise illegal under state law. So we are saying in this proposal, for a basement, an attic, garage, detached unit, we believe that you should have the right as a 1 or 2 family home to add 800 square feet on your lot. That's it. Then the associated questions of, okay, well, is there a limitation in a basement pursuant to state law still applies? And then, of course, the questions that you appropriately raised about, is this a good choice for me as a homeowner based on what I might be able to generate in terms of income from an additional unit versus additional tax obligation? That becomes a property owner by property owner calculation.
Ed Weintraub, Jewish Star.
Okay, I'm going to echo a little bit of what Monica said. Our readers are primarily in areas without great mass transit access. And the opposition that we hear about this proposal has to do with parking. And frankly, I don't think most people believe the notion that developers are going to build parking that's needed. If it's cheaper for the developer to build more units and reap the money, given the housing shortage, which is the underpinning of this whole project. There's a big housing shortage. People need housing. People will buy or rent housing in areas without adequate parking because they need a place to live. And then parking becomes a greater problem, both for the new people and for the people who already live there. I know the Riverdale Press, which is an area that has poor transit, ran an editorial last week that basically said this plan sounds great for Manhattan, but for any area outside Manhattan that doesn't have great mass transit, the parking mandate is a killer.
I'll respond to that by saying that what we have seen in other areas that have done what we're proposing is not what you have suggested, Ed, that all of a sudden there is a flood of housing units without parking where it is needed. We have not seen that. To the contrary, what we have seen is that parking continues to be provided in areas where you have transit deserts and where it is needed for those units. I will also note for you the regularity with which we see at the City Planning Commission proposed developments that go well above the minimum mandate. So if it's 25% is the minimum, in some cases, developers are coming to us with 100% or 75% or 50%, well above the minimum, which does inform, the question of, well, what is the minimum doing in those situations? And I think that what we have seen is there's plenty of evidence of the market defining the need here for parking. And I think that is exactly what you will continue to see.
Rick O'Connor from the Roosevelt Islander.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Rick.
Hi, can you tell me, is Roosevelt Island included under this proposal? Because, I mean, as I think you probably know, most of Roosevelt Island is leased by the city to the state, although there are several city-owned properties that might be able to hold, more affordable housing. So first of all, does this apply to Roosevelt Island?
It does, although let me encourage you, and also let's circle up to take a look at the applicability map specifically, just so that I can answer that question with precision without understanding the precise legal dynamic as to who is responsible for what where. Let's go through that with you separately, because I think that's you ask a really good question. But we have applicability maps here, which would include Roosevelt Island. We can show it to you specifically.
Okay, now also just following up on that. So Roosevelt Island, like almost every other community in New York City, is just experiencing huge rent increases. And many of the people who have lived here for years really are not able to afford the new rents. There was a new total all affordable housing building recently put up about 2 years ago, 340 units of all affordable housing at various income levels. And there were 70,000 applications for those 340 units. There was a 50% community preference for residents in the lottery, so that people who have built the community would be able to have a better chance of getting those. Is there a community preference in these proposals?
There is not. This is, and the city has, moved away significantly from community preferences for a variety of reasons. But it's a very important point that you make about people on Roosevelt Island and beyond who are very concerned about the price of their rent and what this might actually mean for them. And there are two things that I would say to you. Number one is that is exactly the reason why we are proposing this. We know that the rent is too high in New York City and that New Yorkers are struggling and that too many of them are rent burdened. That is a direct function of the fact that there is an imbalance of power between landlords and tenants in New York City, and that when you are up for a lease renewal and you see an exorbitant increase, you have no real and good options or bargaining power, for that matter, when you don't have alternatives. We want to even that out by creating more supply to give tenants more opportunities. Number two, as it relates to the affordable housing development that you described, really important part of our ability to create income restricted units for New Yorkers, and is a piece, but not the only piece, to our ability to create options for New Yorkers for housing supply. We can't, as the city, subsidize our way out of the crisis through 100% affordable buildings alone. We need to enable growth throughout this wide geography, and to allow housing of all types, including market housing, including affordable housing as a component part of broader developments. We need all of it to be able to take a dent out of this crisis. And by creating a little bit more housing everywhere, we believe that will have the effect of alleviating the rent burdens of Roosevelt Islanders and all New Yorkers, which is really fundamentally why we're doing this. My team is telling me that that Roosevelt Island has a specific zoning designation of R72, but you know what? I still think, Casey, let's follow up with Rick after, because I just want to make sure that we're covering his very specific questions about state authority versus city issues, which are very particular to Roosevelt Island. So Rick, if that's okay, I want Casey from my team just to circle up with you after so that we make sure we get your info absolutely correct.
So how would we do that?
Well, I'm going to suggest that JD email you, Rick, and Casey together on the same email, and then we start that and get your questions answered.
All right, thank you very much.
That's great. I'll connect you after this call.
Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jamie.
Rico Dupree at Radio Soleil.
Yes, thanks for having this important discussion. Now, an important factor for this housing shortage that we have here, as I understand it, is what I would call concentrated distribution of new constructions in the city. And if I'm to explain to my listeners what is the reason behind for that, what would you say? That's one question. And the last question is, the vacancy rate is 1.41% right now in the city. Is there a rate that is acceptable to you, for example, or any correlation between vacancy rate and rent levels?
Great. Thank you. Well, first, in terms of the imbalance, so as I noted in my presentation, last year, of our 59 community boards, 10 of them produced as much housing as the other 49 combined. Why is that? Well, fundamentally, we have had for years exclusionary policies which have made it very difficult to create new housing in lots of areas of New York City. And we both respect the neighborhood character and distinctive feel of all neighborhoods of New York and want to protect that, while we also think that on the margins of many neighborhoods in New York City, we have the ability to open the door a crack to allow for a modest amount of additional housing units in a way that will be easily absorbed, not have dramatic impact, and also allow for us to deal with the crisis that we are in. So I would point to zoning as a fundamental barrier in many cases to creating new housing units, which is why we are taking this initiative in the context of a zoning text amendment to try to address it. Your next question about what is a healthy vacancy rate? Well, there is a rate under which the New York City declares a housing emergency. I believe I'm gonna just pause for a second. I think that is I think that's a 3% vacancy, or it's a 5% vacancy rate. 5% vacancy rate is an emergency. So somewhere north of 5 is not an emergency per New York City. And somewhere north of that is healthy. So we are well below the emergency level and well below a healthy level of vacancy, which is why New Yorkers are feeling the pain here and why we really need to act this year.
Hello, we are at time. We have 2 more questions. Mr. Grodnick, if you have time for 2 more questions.
Sure, let's do it.
So Izania from Riverdale Press.
Hi. So my question is about the building of residential spaces on top of commercial spaces. And when big developers come into areas where they want to buy this property, are there going to be protections for small businesses and people who maybe can't afford to stay in a space when someone is coming in to take it?
You're talking about for a business?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a conversation that we're having right now with the Department of Small Business Services and chambers of commerce. We do want to be thoughtful about how to make this positive all around for businesses that are on commercial overlays where there might be future development. Most importantly, and this is part of the process that we're having this conversation, and I think it's a good issue for us to flag. The issue that we are trying to resolve here, of course, is once you do have housing above a town center, when you do have housing above that commercial corridor, it is great for businesses. It's great for the residents. It's great for the walkability of a neighborhood. It's great for allowing you to access the goods and services that you need without having to travel great distances. That is what we are ultimately after, but also understand that change does impact people in different ways. So the question about small businesses is one that we are looking at right now.
And Javier Castaño from Queens Latino will be our last question for the day.
You have presented a lot of information to digest. It's very important. It's an ongoing issue, I guess. The biggest problem will be affordability. So how are you planning to balance between these new buildings, these new construction, this new zoning to make the city even less affordable for a lot of people, more expensive? So have you thought about that?
Yes. There are two things that I would say to that. The first is fundamental to this entire proposal is that by adding more housing, we are able to reduce costs for New Yorkers. That's the reason for doing this. We know today that housing costs are high, that prices become elevated on account of a scarcity problem. And when people are looking to negotiate their rent, they are in no position of bargaining strength. We want to correct that imbalance and create more options for New Yorkers so that rents can come down and the pressures that people are feeling overall, and certainly in particular neighborhoods, can be alleviated. We also are incentivizing in this proposal the creation of lots of affordable housing. Part of our universal affordability preference, we are actually bonusing, we are incentivizing the creation of affordable housing specifically. That 20% bonus that I talked about in the presentation, that is applied for affordable units, because we believe that affordable units should not just be located in particular neighborhoods. We should have them spread out across a much wider geography in New York City. And we think that this will be a very meaningful part of the equation. We have had programs that are voluntary affordable housing programs in the past. This would replace all of those, and we think that this will be a much more meaningful proposal. We also have lowered the AMI levels. So the access point will be, instead of 80%, which is what it has historically been previously, 80% of the area median income will now be 60% of the area median income. Before it would needed to be at 80%. Now it's 60, it's blended 60. It can be a little below, it can be a little above, averaged out to 60. And that's all deliberate. That's deliberate because AMIs have gone up over time. We see the needs of New Yorkers and want to try to address it. But the big picture here is that the question you raised and the question that Rick of Roosevelt Island raised, those are fundamental to the reason why we are going forward with a proposal that is citywide in scale and that will help us take a real bite out of our housing crisis. The cost of housing is too high for New Yorkers. We believe this will have a direct impact.
Sir, thank you so much. If you have any other questions and you're on this call, please do email us at ethnicmedia@cityhall.nyc.gov. That address is now in the chat. You may also just directly email myself or Kita and send in questions here. We will forward those on and have those answered for you directly. On the behalf of Mayor's Office of Ethnic and Community Media and everyone here, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to Dan Grodnick for all of the information he's given us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you all.